I've touched on this briefly, but going to go over the importance of your data model in this one. Before we get into that, I guess let's go ahead and delete that other column within our calculated measure group so we can poke in a measure group there. Wonderful. All right, so now let's get into the data model. So with DAX and your data model and Power BI, DAX is all reliant on your data model. So your DAX calculations don't work unless your data model is set up, right? So let's kind of throw out another one of those examples. So if we keep that same source from the vacancies, so we keep that same source and throw in the revenue amounts back, we can see that those values do get grouped up, right? Those are the correct revenue amount values by the vacancy source, and I can know that because of our model and how it's set up. However, let's go ahead and change our model real quick and remove one of those relationships, and we can see how everything goes away and everything starts to break. So if we remove one of those relationships and our model isn't set up properly, we can't create the correct value, right? DAX in the DAX engine can't work through its context properly to give us a value that makes sense by the table, by the lookup table we have on our table, right? So if we go back to that model view, let's go through kind of what just happened there. So what we removed was that vacancy relationship to our placements. Let's go ahead and open that back up. So what we removed was that vacancy ID to our placements vacancy ID. So we need that relationship within our model so that it knows from our revenue table that those vacancies are related to the placements. So within our model, we don't have a direct relationship between that vacancy table and the revenue, right? A revenue table doesn't have a vacancy ID on it. And if it does, it might, but even if it does, we don't want it to relate it that way because maybe we want to know how many placements have been tied to a vacancy as well, right? So we need that vacancy to placement relationship, but then that revenue table also needs to be tied to those vacancies. And that again happens through that model through the placement table, right? So we've got those vacancies in that one-way relationship down to that placement table, and that placement table is related to that revenue, which allows us to then break out those values and then sum up correctly to that 90 that we were seeing across the board, right? So again, you can see that 90.3 down there in that total, then each of those sources and each of that context values for that measure are all different. It's all giving us the actual revenue values for the actual vacancies in that source. And then again, look at that 9.3. If we go back to the model and remove that relationship again, we can again see we're going to break everything. We don't know, we can't, Power BI cannot identify what of this total 90 belongs into what vacancy, right? If we instead threw in a status on placement, oh, got rid of the wrong one. If we instead threw on status by placement, since that relationship still exists, the measure works, right? So again, just going back to how DAX is totally reliant on the model, that's kind of proof of concept right there. So that's what we mean when we say that modeling is kind of everything within Power BI, and then you just build on top of the model that you create to make your visualizations and to make your analysis and to give your insights, right? So your model is really your base, and your base has to be correct to get all of the other items within Power BI to line up nice and neat for Power BI to function as it's kind of intended to function, to be super efficient on those big data sets and to give you those really quick and valuable insights, right? So let's get into kind of the further scope of this model so we can kind of understand what we're going to be working with as we go through writing some of these measures throughout this course. So we've got our client table up top. That is going to be related to our client contacts. So again, real quick, going back out, let's just assume we are working at a recruitment firm. We are recruiting in employees or contract workers, full-time employees for job opportunities at some of our clients, right? So our clients will come to us with a vacancy or a job opportunity, and then we will land a placement for that vacancy. Those contractors or full-time employees. Since we place them, we earn revenue for that placement, and each of those placements have candidates, right? So that's kind of the model and the sample data set that we're working with here. So even though it might look a little bit complicated, when you kind of start thinking about it and kind of talking through it, you can understand kind of what that model starts to look like in your head, and then when you get it on the page, it starts to kind of make sense, right? So we've got our clients, and those all of our clients will have client contact, or all of our client contacts are going to have a client, right? And those client contacts are going to be what give us vacancies. So we have a client. We need to get a vacancy or a job opportunity or some work from that client. That work is delivered to us through a client contact. So we have a client contact that's related to a client, and those client contacts produce vacancies or job opportunities that we can then give placements filled through by our candidates, right? So that's kind of how that model is all set up, going through it kind of top to bottom. Again, we've got those clients that have client contacts within those clients. Each of those contacts produce opportunities, job opportunities, or vacancies that we can fill. From those vacancies that we can fill, we have placements that go into those vacancies. Candidates are what fill the vacancies. Again, and candidates are not related to anything else over here, right? Candidates aren't related to our clients or our client contacts or our vacancies. Candidates are just the candidates. They're totally separate from all of the other items, but they are related to placements, right? So that's why we need that just candidate table kind of off to the side, but it's still related to our placement data, since our placement data is going to be related to our fact tables. So we can still filter by candidate data and throw in some candidate data context. Let's throw in candidate source. And our revenue amounts do still match up, right? So even though it's kind of not related to the vacancy at all, we can still kind of see how our vacancy or our source for our candidate does work. And so let's go. So if we put the candidate source on top, and then we put the vacancy source underneath, again, with our model, we can see values for both of those. So because of our model setup, we've got both of those items related, our candidates and our vacancies related to our placements, and we're taking a sum of our revenue values, and these filters are all one-way filters, so going top to bottom, all of these values are going to filter into our revenue, right? So when we're looking at our table now, we've got all of those values, our candidate source, our vacancy source, and then all filtering into our revenue. So these items all break out because of all of those different relationships that we've got set up within our model. Again, if we go ahead and just delete one of these relationships, we can go ahead and see that our model breaks, right? So on that lower end, on this vacancy end, we can see that we do have the correct vacancy split, but for every single candidate source, because again, that candidate relationship has been removed, so we don't know what vacancy goes to those candidates that were placed within that source. Then if we just add this back in, we can again see that Facebook brought in 9.1 from the candidate source, so of the candidates that have been placed on our placement table, 9.1 of our total revenue has been from candidates in the source of Facebook ads. Of that 9.1, you can then further see that breakdown by the vacancy source for which placement they were placed at. Right? So you can, again, just based on that model, you can keep digging further into the data and building it out and getting those really quick insights, all because of that data model, right? So if we want to just keep going, we can just keep going with it, right? We can put the placement ID all the way down there. So if we want to go in to see in exactly what placement actually brought in the revenue, we can even see what placement brought in the revenue, right? What was the biggest placement? Maybe there's some employee that's bringing in all the dollars for these Facebook ads. Why is he the special one? Why are they bringing in all the dollars, right? You can then you can just super dig down into all of those different things just by using this one simple sum function, right? All we've done is just included a sum function, and then it's just the model that's doing all the rest of the work, right? The DAX is just given us a value that we can analyze further. The model is doing all of the heavy lifting with providing that DAX function, the context, to give us the value that we're looking for, the sum of the revenue on our revenue table. Right. So again, just going into the model, it is very important to make sure that your model is set up. And if any of that kind of model talk didn't really make sense to you, check out the Power course. We've got a great section on data modeling. Definitely suggest you take a look at that before we get into writing all of these DAX formulas, because again, that model is definitely going to be what drives all of your success with DAX and Power BI. You've got to have your model set up right so that you can get any of your DAX formulas correct and running efficiently. So, all right, see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching the video, guys. The video was from just a snippet of a full course that we are releasing on Learn-PowerBI.com. The full course is only focused on everything DAX. It's about 7 hours of coursework on just DAX, all things focused around DAX. So strongly encourage you guys to go check it out. You can find it on the course list page. If you just go to LearnPowerBI.com, it will be listed right there for you. Whole bunch of different courses and resources out there if you want to get involved. We also have a forum page for asking any questions. Definitely check it out, and I'll be posting more videos like this in the future from some courses, and I'll just keep churning them out if you guys keep finding it helpful. Thanks for tuning in. Bye, guys.